Okay, hello everyone. Welcome, welcome. So what we'll do is we'll give it a few minutes, about a minute or so, to allow everybody to join us. So thank you for joining us for our webinar. We'll give it, as I say, a minute, let as many people join as possible, and then I'll make a start and introduce you to my lovely panelists that are here to join us today. And yes, do use the Q&A throughout the webinar to post your questions to any one of us or to all of us. And what we'll do is towards the end of the webinar, I'll aim to go through and address as many questions as possible. But obviously do post your question as soon as it comes to mind. Otherwise you might forget by the time we get to the Q&A session. And also use it to just say hi. So I'm going to give it another 30 seconds or so. Okay. Hi, Rajiv. I love this interaction. Hello, hello, everyone. Oh, Ruth. Some lovely comments coming through. Okay, as soon as it says 3:02 on my clock, I will make a start. Still got lots of people joining, which is exciting. Okay, right, so let's make a start. So welcome. We're going to talk about scaling Agile and what are some of the challenges that you guys face. And I've got a group of experts here to join me today that are going to sort of talk about these challenges and how they've encountered them and addressed them in the real world and impart that knowledge with you. So let me introduce the lovely panel that we've got here. So we've got Michelle Rowland, who is the Chief Examiner for PRINCE2 Agile version 2. So hi, Michelle, everybody.
Yeah.
You can wave at everyone. We've got Sue Childs. Sue Childs is a practicing project manager that's been in the world of project management, program management, and all things Agile related for a long, long time, well over a few decades. And Sue also happens to work alongside us with helping us to write exam questions as well. And we've also got Nader Arad, who is a very experienced project manager, started very early on in his career working in construction. And Nader, what was it you said earlier?
Process plants projects.
There you go, process plants. And has since moved into consultancy. And those of you that are on LinkedIn will know that Nader is very, very popular on LinkedIn. And he works with a lot of organizations giving guidance around the do's and don'ts within project and program management. So welcome to my lovely panel. Let's kick off this conversation. And it is going to be very conversational based, just so that the audience is aware. So the first challenge that I thought we would address is to talk about whether or how we overcome empowerment. It can be a real challenge in projects that are trying to adapt agile ways of working. What does empowerment mean? Do we need to have a hierarchical organization? Does it need to be a flat organization? And I thought I'd go to Sue first and then you guys can chip in. So over to you, Sue. How do we overcome that?
Hi. Well, in actual delivery of projects, what I find is you can deliver any project well when you have the A team. And Agile works absolutely brilliantly when you have fantastic staff. They're all technically skilled. They know what they're doing. They have empowerment. They can collaborate. In the real world, you tend to get those that are available. So I have existing staff with variable experience, variable willingness to take on Agile, have different knowledge of different methods, which leads to a sort of lower velocity of your team. Actually, you're delivering less. It's also hard to ascertain velocity because they'll have different skill sets. So you might do one well in 1 week, not so well in another week, trying to get an average and work that out. So in a real world, it's much harder to get that empowerment across and equality across the team, because of this practicality of who's available. Trying to address that, it's a very big picture, working with your management levels to build the skills up, assigning suitable tasks to the different levels of people on the team, planning your projects appropriately. It's all the things that everyone knows they should do. It's just very hard to actually convince your management to do that without the buy-in and the change of the culture to do so. So that's the real life experience. It's hard to do. When it goes well, it goes well. When it doesn't, so no, you guys, what's an opening gambit?
Yeah, so I think my experience is sort of similar to you in a way, Sue. In very hierarchical organisations like the Ministry of Defence or police force, or even the civil service generally, where a lot of it is grade driven, they have struggled. My experience is they've struggled with empowerment, particularly, because you want decisions to be made really quickly on the ground by an agile delivery team. Without empowerment, decisions then tend to get pushed up the hierarchy and then slowed down. So it can cause a slowdown, a grinding to a halt almost of agile delivery while waiting for the people higher up the organisation to make decisions. So empowerment is quite difficult. However, with the right training, explaining, it's got to be to senior management as well, to the higher up the hierarchy rather. The importance of agile, the quick decision making needed, even linking in with prioritization here, all really important. If we can get that done, and obviously you can involve the senior management team in prioritization earlier in the project as well, or even at things like planning sessions. So those are partial solutions at least. Nader, sorry, have you got something to add now?
I'm thinking about two different things. The first one is that it's a spectrum. It's not absolute things to say that people are not empowered or they are empowered. People in the team have a certain level of authority, and it depends on the type of project. We always have that. So, for example, in PRINCE2, the whole idea of having managed by exception, that is about empowerment. That is about the level of empowerment we want to have in the project. Mm-hmm. Now, in some agile projects, we have a flat organization where there's no one to escalate to almost. So that gets almost close to absolute empowerment, but it's still not, because we have, for example, human resources in the organization. You cannot really do anything you want. You have a customer and so on. So I think this is the first thing to understand. And for example, when we go to PRINCE2 Agile, we have more hierarchy that we have in some very simple forms of Agile. And that's what we need in order to scale up our system. And that's okay. It's nothing against the nature of agility. And we should never, in my opinion, think that the more empowerment we have, the better it is. It is not the case. There's a good amount of empowerment based on the type of product we are creating, how sensitive the product is. If we are working in entertainment, a piece of software for entertainment, it's okay. Let's have people with full power. But if you are creating a piece of software for a hospital, I don't want that to be as fast as possible. I want it to be safe. And that requires hierarchy, proper governance, workflows, and so on.
Perfect. Would you also agree that in this particular situation, when we talk about hierarchy or flatline structure, that mindset of senior leadership is also quite key, which is something that we do touch on within the new PRINCE2 Agile book, and the importance of mindset. Did anybody want to elaborate on that at all? Either one of you.
I have some ideas about it. It definitely depends. It relates to the governance and part of it, at least part of it, comes from the organization. As people who are responsible for the organization, or own it as a private organization, have a certain way of working, and that reflects into the projects. And again, what I really always want to insist on, it's not about having or not having empowerment. It's about having the right amount of empowerment. And the model that we have in Prince2 makes it really visible and very practical. We set thresholds for time, for cost, and so on. We say, if something has a consequence that has a cost of more than this amount, we want it to be escalated. Otherwise, it's up to you. You go on, decide what you want to do about it.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. So building on this then, so we're talking about empowerment. Building on that, I have another question for you. A lot of people think that if you're using Agile, that structure isn't necessarily needed and discipline can kind of be pushed to one side. That seems to be a common challenge that a lot of people face. So I'm going to ask Michelle to take this one on to start with. So Michelle, what are your thoughts on that?
So I've heard the myth that Agile is sexy, excuse the term, that it's fun or it's ad hoc, i.e. unplanned, unstructured, etc. And in fact, I did work on a project once where the Agile coach, and it was my first ever Agile project, so this was a good while ago. The Agile coach was like, oh, it's Agile, you don't need a plan, you don't need structure. That project failed. I decided I wasn't going to work on it any longer because of the lack of structure and the lack of planning. And that project failed. After 12 months, they delivered nothing, which proves that you do need structure, you do need a plan. And in fact, Scrum, if you use Scrum as an example, is incredibly structured. I would argue that it's probably one of the most structured things that you can do because, there are these prescribed events. Your sprint planning, your daily scrum, your sprint review, your sprint retrospective, all of those are incredibly structured things, aren't they? So yes, Agile needs a plan, but as per the Agile manifesto, we should be willing to change it. So it's not about not having a plan, not having structure. It's about having a plan, but being willing to adapt and be flexible as required, as opposed to flying by, without any guide ropes, if you like. We do need a plan. So there you go.
Thank you. And if we go back to our Prince2 Agile book for a second, and we talk about the need for structure, would you say, having been involved in writing it and taking all the feedback that people have given, that we're providing that? Do you think it gives that level of structure?
Well, Prince2 Agile gives us this idea of having a project plan, which we now think of more in terms of like a roadmap and backlogs. It gives us this vision that we need. So it's giving us this lovely structure to help people picture where we want to go long term, and how we're going to get there, and the adaptability and flexibility to achieve that, which, is all in line with the Agile manifesto, is it not so?
Absolutely. So going over to Sue and Nida, you guys are out in the big bad world, you're delivering this. What are your thoughts on this? So sticking with the theme of structure and discipline, what are your thoughts?
I think in terms of Agile and Prince2 are very much different beasts. That there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what each one will provide. And the Prince2 element of Prince2 Agile actually is creating the governance and the overriding control. So more related to one of the things that Agile's it's already accounts for risk. Its whole being is that because you deliver things up early, because you've got everybody involved, there's much less risk. You don't need to do risk management. And depending obviously on the size of your project, risk management is something every project should do to ensure that it is actually going to deliver at the end. So Prince2 element of that is now being built into Prince2 Agile will provide you with that little extra bit of governance and structure that provides the management levels to look down at a project. Agile is for delivering the project, is doing the actual work, and doesn't change that. The PRINCE2 element provides the overriding. So in effect, it's you just decide you want to do something. You never would build a house by let's just have a go and get some bricks together and do this. You would structure it, you would deliver it. And any project, no matter how you deliver it, has to have that same degree of scoping, financing, risk management to make sure that you are going to deliver it at the very end. I think one of the things that I sort of was, when I was thinking about this question, is that technically everyone is quite specialized. And I think one of the problems with Agile itself is trying to make people work out a position is actually one of the misnomers to it, in terms of it's so flexible, everyone can do anything. And it's being able to implement it where somebody who is a technical specialist, if you make them not be a technical specialist, they'll be slow, they'll make mistakes. So it's finding that structure within Agile that you can make the use of everybody's skills, but be collaborative to get the benefits of Agile without it. So it's sort of it's finding a balance on that front. So,
absolutely. Thank you. Nida, did you want to add anything to that?
I think that it's really important to define what we mean by agile. That solves a lot of problems. Originally, what it means, we have two different ways of creating the product, which Michelle also mentioned, the difference between project management and being or not being agile. That's because project management is one layer and building the product is another layer. And in order to build something, you have two general ways of doing it. One is that you take your time, contemplate on what has to be done, because you don't want to waste all the resources. You want to, for example, send a rover to Mars. You send it once. You don't go through trial and errors. You can't simulate it, but that's a way of contemplating. So you take your time, think about all the possibilities, and do it right. That's one way, which works in most cases. When you want to build a bridge, a building, that's what you do. But sometimes we are dealing with people's perception of the product instead of the physical world. And that makes things very complicated. You can create a product that is really amazing, but people won't buy it. Why? Because it's not interesting to them. You cannot explain it sometimes. So when it is about the perception of people, things become very complicated. And our response in this community was to create adaptive systems for that, agile systems. So instead of imagining what the perfect product is and then building it, we go on with an overall understanding and find our way. That's agile. And it's harder to do than a predictive project, because we need to have an environment where we can move easily and let our future, let the rest of the product emerge based on the feedback we generate in our environment. That makes it very difficult, and the only way to navigate it properly is with discipline. And that's what we've always had in Agile. I think Michelle gave the example of a Scrum, but we also had XP, and the amount of discipline we had in XP, extreme programming, was 10 times more than a Scrum, and that was one of the first things in Agile. Now, when we take care of this, then we can talk about why it happened that many people started thinking that Agile doesn't need discipline. I think the reason is that many of the Agile systems are simple. Not easy necessarily, but they are simple, and they give people they allow people to say that they have a system. So they are justified. Using, again, as an example, PRINCE2 project management, that's not that easy. You cannot learn it and start using it in 2 hours. You have to put some effort into it, but you can pretend to be using Agile in 2 hours. And what happens is that you don't really have a system, you don't have any discipline, but you can pretend that you have, and it justifies you and gives you a good feeling. Yes, I'm doing agile. And the only type of agile you have here is the sloppy agile without discipline. That's why they exist, in my opinion.
In name only, basically.
So you,
So-
in effect, you'd need
Sorry.
a pragmatic, experienced project manager to direct your projects to overcome some of these issues.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I have one quick follow-up question very briefly. So we're doing things like Scrum and Kanban. We know that these things exist out there. But when we talk about scaling doing these things within a project environment, how do you think the new book helps people do that? The new versions. How does PRINCE2 Agile help us to scale from what we've seen generally used in the world into their project environment? What are your thoughts? Since you've all been involved in the book, what are your thoughts?
I think it goes back to our previous conversations, more or less. It's about the level of a structure. The first question you asked was about having an organization, whether or not it should be a flat organization.
Mm-hmm.
One important thing here is that when we have a really, really small project with only a few people, maybe less than 10 people, we do have the option to have a flat organization. But when we have a bigger project, we don't even have that option. You cannot have a project with 800 people and tell them, okay, this is your project, go on, good luck, self-organize and deliver the product. That doesn't work. You need to have some form of hierarchy and a structure and governance. And I think not the only thing, but one of the things that PRINCE2 Agile does is that it gives a structure like that. Now, some people who are into Agile and don't have a lot of background in project management may say that it's not compatible with it, but I know many people who read PRINCE2 Project Management and the first thing they say, this is Agile, isn't it? Because we do have the cycles, we have a plan that is not fully detailed upfront and
managed by stages. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Rolling wave planning, as it's called elsewhere, or just in time planning. Exactly right, Nada.
Yeah, sometimes it's really a difference in degree, not in kind. And I think people really have to give all different systems a chance. There's a lot to learn.
So I want to lead on from this. So I have my next question. When we talk about being reactive and adaptive, and Michelle, I want to come to you. In project teams, one of the challenges they have is, what's the key difference? How do I know whether we're reacting to a situation or whether I'm adapting to a situation? And I know that when we had this conversation, you really wanted to clarify for people the importance of understanding using something like an MVP correctly. So what are your thoughts on that?
So often, projects I've worked on, if you say to users, what do you need, what do you want, they actually don't know the answer to that. And the only way to find that out, as we did when developing PRINCE2 Agile, was to develop an MVP, minimum viable product. Now, there's a lot of confusion out there about the term MVP. Some people, I've seen projects where MVP becomes the end goal of the project, when actually, i.e., they almost think it's the minimum marketable subset, or, that sort of thing. What actually MVP, minimum viable product, is let's get something out there, almost like a prototype, something we can trial, we can pilot, we can test the market with. And the purpose of that is to be adaptive, if you like, i.e., use it, get feedback like we do with PRINCE2 Agile, understand, is it what the market wants? Is it what the users want? And if it is, then obviously we can build on that and enhance it and then develop the end product, whatever that product is. The opposite would be
adaptable, right?
while staying adapted, exactly right, and constantly getting feedback. Reactive is you go live and it's not the product that the users want at all, and now you've got to react, if you like. That's how I would interpret it, rather than planning to be adaptive, i.e. building an MVP up front to trial and test, is this going in the right direction, before spending too much money, too much resource on developing something that is literally of no use. So, and PRINCE2 Agile, of course, talks heavily about the use of an MVP and how we can use that to be adaptive and, focus on meeting user needs.
I think in the real world, one of the biggest problems with that is the speed of delivery. And you do deliver something that is of value, but you get, in my experience, technical debt. So you actually can't stop delivering this thing that appears to be doing everything you want, but you've actually fudged it in order to make it appear that it's doing what it should be doing. And you're accumulating technical debt as you go that becomes greater and greater. And I think that's a real world problem of having to stop to say, look, this making the illusion that you're delivering something and it works for now doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually going to be a robust product at the end.
And that's what I was really referring to, Sue, wasn't it? When I was saying MVP becomes almost your own product, i.e. you're holding it together, as I like to say, with chewing gum, string and paper clips. And then when it becomes the end product, you've got something that just doesn't work long term. And the total cost of ownership then goes up.
The post office systems, everyone's heard of that, is the ultimate failure in a project that didn't rebuild its pilot and has not performed as well as it could, and that nobody's owned up to what really should have been sorted out very early on in the project. And that's just bad implementation. It doesn't. That's not true of every agile project, but it's something you have to be really mindful of. That that technical debt is a real big problem that can exist.
So
I've seen projects where they've spent almost the first 6 months fixing the technical debt left behind by previous projects before they could even start developing what they were meant to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to follow up on this. So Neda, we had a conversation about this, and you said something really interesting that stuck with me. The difference between forward-facing feedback and backward-facing feedback, and how do we use that to address a challenge like this?
Yeah, so the way I see it, imagine that you're in the middle of the project and you observe what's happening with what you've done so far, with the deliverables, with the increments that you have created. If everything you do is about finding problems in what you have done before and fixing them, that's reactive and that's horrible. But if you collect feedback in order to discover what can be the best next steps for the product, that's adaptive. That's real agile. That is the biggest difference. So when we talk about agile, it's not about just going on with the project without any thinking about the product and see what happens. That's not really agile. It's about adapting to the environment, not for the past, but for the future. So the feedback we get, there are two types of adjustment we do based on the feedback, and we have feedback in all types of project. We have change in all types of project. Sometimes in some books, I see that they write it as if having change is only about agile projects. It was always there. But if you only check the previous products and fix them, that's not enough for being agile. And the other thing about feedback, not entirely related to our topic here, but it's about some of the mistakes in agile projects, is that feedback is not going to people and asking, how do you feel about it? Because what they tell you is usually wrong. That's not how they would react in practice when they have to pay, for example. So the best feedback is to observe them when they are using the software. Asking can be there to add more information, but that's not by any means the only source of information. The best type of feedback is observation.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's move on to building on this. So my next question for you all is, why is momentum so key when adopting and scaling agile practices within a project environment? So I'm going to come to you on this one, if I may.
Well, I guess it's true of life, isn't it? If you don't see a result happening and you lose that momentum, it all seems a bit pointless. I think if you're in an organization who's trying to implement agile and move forward, it's quite easy for developers to be sort of in a semi sort of waterfall agile, sort of agile in inverted commas, mindset, where you're sort of delivering little bits quickly, but you're not really doing it in an agile way, and then they get stuck into that mindset. Some of the things you might try to get out of that is to maybe run a pilot project where you've actually get a team together that do use agile correctly, to demonstrate how it's done, to demonstrate what benefits you can get and how to move that forward. So it's sort of, you know, if you can't see any reason in it benefit in doing so, and you also don't understand it, then it's going to be you lose momentum to deliver. And that's true of any project, actually. Projects do sort of start off with a big oomph, and then they appear to get into this, are we ever going to deliver this and finish? It's getting the benefits so that you can see that there is going to be something at the end worth doing.
Thank you. Did anyone want to add to that? So sticking with the question of, you know,
adopting.
Yeah.
I was thinking about one thing. We have a problem in the project ecosystem, and it's that we do talk a lot about project management or project delivery in any form, but we don't talk enough about program management. And for example, sometimes we talk about change management, organizational change management, which is a special form of program management, but we only talk about some of the things that reflected into project management from organizational change management, which is not enough. And for adopting Agile in an organization, it's a program. I think it's a good idea to label it as a program and use proper program management for it. It can be MSP. Before it was called MSP, now it's called PRINCE2 Program Management, or it can be anything. A methodology, it really helps. And
Thank you.
And I think focusing on sorry, Neda, go ahead.
That's it. No. I want to say that there's
finished.
a lot of useful information in program management systems that cover all of these things. For example, involving different types of people who will be using the system, different stages of work, and so on. Go on, Michelle, please.
I was going to say, linking in with what you were saying, Neda, with the idea of a program to facilitate scaling of agile project management. If you run your agile project like Sue was saying, you can trial certain things, can't you? Certain ways of working, learn what works and what doesn't, and then work to implement further improvements within that program. And I think that gives you a longer term journey, if you like, rather than thinking of it as a one-off project, thinking of it as a longer term journey, and how you can then roll it out across more than one project and build on those experiences. It gives that opportunity for sort of more joined up thinking, and, you know, how do we achieve the vision of what we're trying to achieve, etc. And not trying to do too much in the first project where you use Agile, your Agile pilot project, if you like. It gives you a chance to say, well, let's limit it and do, you know, a restricted amount of stuff that's going to add the most value, where we can learn the most, almost like an MVP. And then feed that through into further projects and further ways of working. But of course, it also allows you to adapt it to the governance that you need. Obviously, public sector projects need a lot of governance, because you know you're spending public money, so you've got to demonstrate governance, control, you know, value for money, all of those things. And, you know, private sector companies, not so different really. But it allows you to build, learn, prove, measure the effectiveness of your Agile implementation as well.
So, okay, let's build on that for real quick. One of the things that I hear a lot of people saying in industry, certainly my past experience, is that why are we doing this as a project? Or why isn't this a project? It could be one or the other. Why is this still in the BAU being treated as product development when actually it sounds more like a project, and also the other way around? So I wanted to ask that question to you guys, and I think I'll go to Neda first, if I may. Do we still need projects? And I know the answer to that, but I want to hear what you have to say. Or should we be focusing on products only? What are your thoughts?
Projects are our way of focusing on the product, properly focusing on the product. That's the best way to see it. I've seen some people talking about the difference between focusing on projects and focusing on products, and that's mainly because they don't understand what projects are, what project management is. And they had experiences in environments where projects were managed really, really poorly, and they thought that's the only way, which is not really the case. When they don't have projects, what happens is that they have a continuous flow of changes to the product. And the difference between that and having projects is that when you have projects, you package changes with purposes, goals, strategies in mind, with limited time, limited budget. You run one project on your product, and then you go on running another project. It gives you the possibility to have a vision, to decide where you want to go, instead of just reacting. That's also the difference between reacting and adapting. Those who don't have projects and only have random changes, ad hoc changes to the product, they just respond to the loudest voice, to the things that seem urgent or important, but they don't
And it's
work
reactive
together.
delivery as well.
Yeah, they don't have a synergy. We want to have that by selecting what goes with what in a package with a holistic perspective, and that's project management, and that's what we always need. And that is our way of focusing on the product, not something instead of focusing on the product.
So I think
Okay,
it comes down to scope, basically. So that's the key element, is actually putting together what are you actually trying to do and what are the benefits for doing so. And as we were talking earlier, the risks related to that and whether you have the resources to implement it successfully. So a project is, I mean, to be honest, you should be scoping everything, but the project enables us, and Neda said, to package together a set of requirements that fall together into something that's cohesive, that you would get more benefit from assigning resources and managing the probably an increased budget for that particular piece of work. One of the government organisations actually I worked in used scoping studies for everything. So they wrote a little scoping study which for anything that was other than a very mundane sort of business as usual maintenance type change. And we would scope out the work to be done, the options that were available to them, and how it would be implemented, timescales. And it was a little sort of almost like a feasibility study for each one. And that gave them the control over whether they wanted to go ahead and how they wanted to implement it. And it's the planning and all of the work up front that you do that makes a project successful as much as anything, if you thought things through. No matter how you implement it, that's the key element. And it may be that you say this is an agile project and this one isn't an agile project. It's thinking about those things up front, that how you want to deliver it.
Yeah, coming in on a sort of reactive rather than adaptive that Neda was talking about, and packaging the work that both of you were talking about, Sue and Neda. I've seen it where business as usual just generates change requests. They go on a product backlog. Actually, it was somebody in IT that prioritized them. Based on presumably the priority allocated by the user at the time, but actually how did they prioritize that versus all the other things on the product backlog, etc. How do we know if these changes fit with the long-term vision of the product? Is it really taking us where we want it to go? Whereas packaging that into project management enables us, as Neda said, to say, actually, we've got this vision of where we want the product to be, how we want it to sit in the market, whether it be, a private sector, insurance policy, or whether it be something in the public sector, like self-assessment for tax returns. How do we want it to work, long-term vision, and then making sure that the work is all aligned to that longer-term vision, that each of the teams is working in the right direction, rather than potentially multiple products all going off in opposite directions.
And you know, something that really happens, I have made that mistake once, is that when you go on like that without proper projects, after two years, we looked back and saw, okay, what have we really done? It's a question you can't really answer. You've been spending a lot of time, you've been making changes, but if someone asks you, what is different now from 2 years ago? You don't have a good answer to that.
And what value has it added, Nada,
Yeah,
as well?
it feels like you've wasted all those resources. And I don't want to name any names, but there are two pieces of software online platforms that many of us use, and they have so many people working. And how different are those from 5 years ago? I don't see any difference.
They're probably working on technical debt.
Technical. I was just about to say those words, so you took them out of my mouth. So I want to link this back to scaling then. We're talking about scaling Agile into projects. So I'm an organization. I generally loosely do project management, and I'm introducing Agile ways of working. I know that my BAU have got Agile down to a T. They're very good at it. And my project teams generally tend to run to set cadence, and they're good at project management. But I now want to amalgamate the two together. Where do I start? How do I do that? Whoever wants to take that one.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? What do you want?
Absolutely. So we've got an organization that is good at their project management, generally speaking. They're also very comfortable with using Agile outside of their project in their business as usual environment. But in their projects, they don't tend to use Agile much, or it's whoever knows about it tends to use it, but the others aren't aware of it. They don't have the knowledge. Where do I start? How do I go about bringing agility into that project? And I guess that's the most basic question I want to ask at this stage, because there are lots of organizations that wouldn't know where to start. How do I go about it? How do I incorporate this into my project? So what's the answer? How do they overcome that challenge?
I think a good question to ask is whether or not you need to be agile.
Very good.
It should not be an assumption, and it's not the right answer for many organizations, really. And they waste a lot of resources when they try to use it for the wrong type of product. So that's the first question. And then if the answer is yes, it would help to be adaptive, be agile, then you should be able to imagine a future where being adaptive and predictive makes a difference. When you think enough about that difference and the way it is formed in the organization, I think that will bring you through the change in the correct way, changing the way you work in the project, having purpose. We have this thing, huge problem, number one problem in my opinion, that people do certain things because they, according to them, Agile says you should do that, because PRINCE2 says so, because the PMBOK guide says so. That's not the right reason. Anytime someone does that, it usually fails. The right way is not to say that I do it because PRINCE2 says so. PRINCE2 says that because it have a reason for that. People have to understand the reason and do it for the reason, not because PRINCE2 says that. And when they do it like that, it works well.
I was going to say education. You need to understand what you're trying to do. So and there's pluses and minuses with all different methods. So your project management will have benefits. Your Agile team will know what they're doing. It's learning how they do it, what you could implement, which elements would suit your organization. And it's things like your suppliers or different companies you work with may have used different methods. Go find out how they use it, learn more about it before you try and do anything. I think it's knowledge and understanding is key. And if you really want to go, your top level management need to understand. You can't decide at your bottom level that you're doing something without having the management buy-in. But so building on Nada's point.
PRINCE2 Agile talks about something called an Agile enablement workshop, where you get all your key stakeholders together, including if you've got a project board, or steering group, whatever you want to call it. PRINCE2 calls it a project board, to get everybody on board with what Agile is, to understand the risks associated with using Agile, which, you know, NADA comes back to, not all organizations or all projects should be Agile. You know, there are some projects where Agile may not be suitable. So getting your senior stakeholders to agree, is this Agile the right way to go? Consider it first of all. And get them involved in making sure everybody understands why Agile is the right answer on this project, what are the risks associated with it, and how are we going to manage those risks to the project, in particular, you know, the Agile risks. And this comes back to Sue, you know, there's a sort of myth in Agile that risk management isn't important. Of course, you know, yes, Agile does reduce the risk of delivering the wrong product to the users by much more involvement of users throughout. But the opposite is also true. Agile brings its own risks.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't get the right empowered caliber of staff who are motivated and willing to share and collaborate, all the things you talked about, I think it was probably in relation to the first question, Sue, that you were talking about. If you don't get those right people, I've seen projects where, you know, teams weren't even on the same time zone, which of course makes collaboration quite difficult. If you're emailing somebody and saying, what's the answer to this question? They finish their time zone and haven't answered your question. You can't move forward the next day. You know, all of these things can be, you know, quite difficult. And therefore, that's why it's really important that we get the senior team involved in understanding the, you know, the importance of agility and being adaptive and empowerment and self-management, but also building in Ada, what you were saying, you know, that's within the product development, but across the project, we still need an element of hierarchy for more important decisions, and we need to understand the risks. Yeah. So
A supporting layer.
But it's piloting. It's the Agile
yeah.
principle of piloting, trialing things without managing your risk. So that is a key element.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And that's been one of my biggest challenges in my past life before taking on this role, is working with organizations that struggle because they want to be agile, but they don't have that understanding. And people at the top think they're supporting the delivery of agile, but actually they're the ones that are causing the most hindrance. So starting at the top, as you talk about the agile enablement, but also going back to that mindset of, I need my leaders to buy into it and to have a basic understanding of it so that they can create that environment for me. Right, my last question before we go into Q&A, so we've got a couple of minutes to answer this. What are some of the challenges that organizations face when they're trying to scale agile, but specifically that organization is already going through change fatigue? They are exhausted from the amount of change that they've already been dealing with. So, Michelle.
So, yeah, one of the problems I've seen is that, you know, each project is moving now to be agile, let's say, in that organization. BAU, business as usual staff, are being faced with release after release from these projects. So all your projects now are delivering these frequent releases, maybe like once a month. And, you know, you're coming into work on a Monday morning and you haven't been given any training, you don't know what's different. So what's really important is that we develop agile ways of delivering that training so that people are made aware of what's changing. It's no good just, you know, thinking, well, it's just minor, people will adapt, because not everybody.
Does that not mean it's just a technically led project and it's not
exactly
implementing the full scope of the change, in effect?
Yeah, exactly right. It's not. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
right.
I'm interrupting you there.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. So they're failing to recognise that training is part of that project and therefore it's needed. And then, you know, people are coming in not knowing what's coming. So it's really important that we develop a release map, not just across projects, but maybe across the whole organisation, to work out, almost at portfolio level or certainly at program level, to work out what impacted areas are, how much change are they facing, is that level of change manageable? There you go. So that's some thoughts from me.
Thanks,
Over to Nada. Nada, do you want to join in?
That's interesting because both of you, Sue and Michelle, are talking about changes within the project. But when I heard the question, I started thinking about organizational change, because a little bit before that, we were talking about adopting Agile in an organization and so on. And the type of answer I had in mind also works on the project level, I think. And what I believe is that people don't get tired of changes because changes are exciting. What they get tired of is meaningless changes, nonsensical changes. When they have a manager, for example, the manager goes on LinkedIn and sees the latest trend and comes and immediately says, okay, from today we're going to do this, without thinking enough about it, and especially without involving people in those organizational changes. Then it becomes something really, really annoying. And when you have enough of that, people burn out, people want to leave, and so on. And so the answer, in my opinion, is to be careful, to be mindful of changes, understand what they really are, and instead of mindlessly following all the trends, try to understand them and see what is best. A lot of great things that we have are really old. Old is not always bad.
Point to myself there. Okay, well, thank you to all three of you for a very engaging conversation. Really, really appreciate your time. So I have some questions for you that the audience have started to submit. So we're going to move into Q&A. So if you are sitting there still with us with burning questions that you'd like to ask, please start getting them in, and I'm going to start posing them to our panelists. So the first question is, let me have a look here. So this goes back to the MVP. Would you say that an MVP is like doing a mini product, a mini project product, which you then build upon? What are your thoughts? Quick, because I want to get through as many as possible. So who wants to take that one?
It can be, but not any mini product is an MVP.
Interesting. Michelle, did you want to add anything to that? That was good.
Yeah, I think it's often just an earlier version of the full product that you build, but it doesn't have to be. It could be something that is almost a pivotal moment. You trial something, it doesn't work, and actually that might lead you to build something entirely different.
Perfect. So you could pivot. Perfect. Yeah. Sue, did you want to add anything?
Nope.
Good. We'll go on to our next one. I want to try and get through as many. This is like a quick fire round. How can you prevent scope creep in an agile environment? Because as you adapt the mini products, there are going to be additions and changes. Interesting. So would you associate those changes as scope creep is my question.
Yeah.
So I would say that if you've got an overall vision of your product, anything that's within that overall vision of where you're going, if it's a sort of change in breadth, so you're adding to the scope at the higher level, then that would be scope creep, and that will actually scope creep. You'd have to go through formal change control.
You should have a business case.
Exactly right. So you'd assess it against the business case. Exactly right. So you go through formal change control. Yeah. Whereas if it's down at the detailed level, I would say then that's more allowable, because you're not changing the overall scope. You're more changing the detail and allowing detail to emerge, and a greater understanding of what we're delivering to emerge and evolve.
But then we have one problem. Sometimes you have really, really small changes that pile up and become something really big. And the typical answer is what we have in PRINCE2 project management, where we have different thresholds. We evaluate individual changes and issues and so on, but we also have controls for the overall impact. And that overall impact can create escalations and going and changing the business case and so on. These are the defense mechanisms we have in PRINCE2.
Thank you. Okay, another question for you. Isn't Agile more adapted to the creation of a new product that's never been built before, or at least for the organisation which ordered that project? So the question's asking, is Agile more for new product development, essentially?
Well, that's the opposite of what Kanban is. Kanban is start with what you've got now and gradually improve it. So I would say no, Agile isn't just about new products. It can be about enhancement of existing products. So I don't know, adding new features or functions to a service or a product that you already have.
Upgrading something, for example.
Upgrading something, yeah, absolutely.
I see it from a different perspective completely, because sometimes people who really like something that like to think that what they do is very special, is for the newest things. But in my opinion, Agile is built for products where the success of the product depends on human perception instead of objective reality. When you have that, you need Agile. When you don't have that, you need predictive systems.
Thank you for that. Okay. I have another question. How would I know, or how do you know, if Agile is the right approach to take? I like this question because it is a very standard question that every project manager is probably going to have to answer at the beginning of their project if we're talking about it in a project environment. How do you know if it's the right approach for you? What should you be looking out for?
It's all about the product. If it is possible to reasonably design a product upfront, and you can be... Something happened. We all became muted. So, if you can be sure that your upfront design can make sense, then it is not a good idea to use Agile. But if you are in a complicated situation, working with human perception for the success of the product, that you cannot create that design upfront, then Agile is the answer for your problem.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, I would say that there's a sort of middle ground, which is hybrid, where you're using a mix of perhaps a bit of Agile and a bit more predictive. And I think there's you're absolutely right. Not all projects can do pure Agile, which is where maybe hybrid comes in. I always
think we don't use that term, do we? We say that every project is going to have an element of agility to it.
Yes. Exactly right. So therefore, that's where hybrid comes in, isn't it? Where you're sort of saying, you can use a mix of more predictive and more adaptive as, for each work package or each piece of work for each team, to make sure that you're using the right approach for each team as it goes, as it develops and evolves.
I think it depends on your skill sets in your organization. So you can't just flip a switch and say we're going to change to using different styles of management and team usage, but it also depends on what you're trying to deliver. So the absolute key benefit of Agile is delivering some value early on rather than later on. So if you can do any project where you can actually test out your theories and deliver something that creates a valuable thing, rather than waiting 3 years to say, oh, it's a bit out of date now and it didn't do what we expected. You want to find that out within 3 weeks, not within 3 years. So there's no point having a singing or dancing product at the end that doesn't do what you want, cost a lot of money, when if you could have done some delivery early on. So it's the thinking about how you deliver value is the key bit, rather than actually what do you do it with. It's how you could deliver some things that you reduce the risk, you get value out of it, you have the right resources to be able to deliver that. If all those things come together, then it's a no-brainer. You should be using Agile. But if those things are not viable, then it isn't. So there is unfortunately no right answer to that. It's going to be unique and dependent on each situation.
Thank you. So we've got 1 minute left, and I just want to add something to that. Is Agile just for IT projects?
Nope.
Absolutely.
No.
I was expecting all of you to say no.
It's exactly what I just said. It depends on what you're delivering, and you can't deliver a house in Agile, but you can deliver bits and pieces of it. in an agile way.
Absolutely.
So
that's the analogy I normally use. You
yeah.
could start decorating the rooms at different points and they could be agile.
Yeah.
Okay,
you can deliver little bits earlier on.
Absolutely.
It depends on it comes back to exactly what I was just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. I want to thank you guys. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Nada. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much for being on this journey with us, helping us get the book, the Prince2 Agile version 2 to where it is. And thank you to our audience. We try to get through as many questions as possible. Please, please do come back to us. We'll have more webinars. We've got another one coming up for you, which is going to build on this one. But until that time, guys, would you like to say goodbye?
Bye. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for your time.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.